Welcome to Wagons of Steel. It's a party and everyone's invited as usual. Today is 4th of July and I haven't made a YouTube video in a while, and today, actually yesterday, a friend of mine loaned me the family Chrysler Town Country to move some stuff around, some t-shirt selling stuff I was doing, and it made me think, I should make another video about the OG wagon of steel. This 1972 Chrysler Town & Country station wagon. Here is the original Wagons of Steel Town & Country station wagon. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. I'm never going to restore this. It's beautiful, just like it is. I love the moss growing on it and the fact you can still see wagon power in there. Here's Dr. Big Block's first big drag car, the 1969 Chrysler Newport. And actually the nose on this car the grill looks a lot like our current Mighty Josephine, the 1970 Chrysler Town & Country. And you can tell the difference. They look very similar in body. The 72 has that little middle piece in the grill, kind of like a 69, 71, 72, 73 Dodge Charger. And the 68 and 69 Newport has a wide open grill. This one has the little Chrysler castles on it. Those are pretty groovy. But this car, I'm not going to do a feature on this car. I've done videos about this car before. This car is what it is. Like my friend likes to say, found Wagons of Steel's first drag car. Thanks, Paul. The Town & Country name first was put on a Chrysler in 1940. And it was, there's Town & Country's in 40 and 41, and barely, I think they made 1,000 of them in 42 before they suspended production of them for World War II. The original Town & Countries, all the way up to like 1950, were really fancy cars. They were made out of Himalayan mahogany and white ash. A lot of cars were built out of wood back then. It was still pretty exotic. They didn't always make station wagons. A lot of times they were convertibles and 4-doors and 2-doors. 1951, 50 or 51 was the first year that Chrysler Town & Countries were made entirely out of steel. And it was around that time that they put the Fire Dome V8 in it, which is known to you and me as the Hemi. I was born in '65, and I don't really know a whole lot about cars from the late 50s or any of the 50s. Not really my bag. But just doing a little research, the Town & Country was a pretty interesting make at the time, or model. It wasn't really a single model. Like Chrysler had several different lines. They had like the Saratoga, the Windsor, and the Newport lines, and each one of these lines they had the Town & Country, which makes it, what, a model? I'm not sure, because they had, at that time they still had Town & Country non-station wagons, 4-doors, and I can't remember ever seeing a convertible, but I'm assuming they had one. Chrysler Town & Country was the last four-door hardtop station wagon, which means no post between the doors. So when you roll all the windows down, you have one big, huge open slot from the front seat to the back seat. I used to have a Plymouth Fury like that. It's pretty cool. I guess they stopped doing it for all types of cars early 70s because it was dangerous, because there's not enough structure in the just having that like stub post that holds the hinges for the back door, and if you get in an accident you go flying out the window and whatever. Still a cool kind of car. If I had to pick the golden era of station wagons, I think this is it. There's some cool stuff from every era, but the early 70s, no matter what brand you're into, like the Ford Country Squire, the Chevy Impala, the Caprice, the Oldsmobile Vista Cruiser, what was the Buick? They were just massive. You know, some might call it excessive amounts of steel and chrome and giant gas sucking engines and room for everyone to sit front ways and sideways and facing each other and facing away from each other, and you could put a whole piece of plywood or 10 in the back. And of course, what better car to have from the golden era is a gold wagon. This wagon is actually called Tawny Gold is the name of the color, which is one of my favorites. I got this one. I can't remember how the word came to me, but somebody called me up and said they had this wagon, and so I went and looked at it, and of course I had to have it. You know, and like so many wagons from this era, you know, I did get this 15 years ago, so it's maybe even more. Shit, I am old. But it was one owner, and you know, for a lot of people these things, well hell, most people, this is just a weird old huge heavy obsolete car, and so they got rid of it because they didn't need it anymore and it sucked too much gas. And you know, I'm blessed to have Dr. Big Block, who can fix anything, can tune all these cars. He specializes in these old cars. You know, it amazes me, you know, how many people I talk to, even at the drag strip, who really don't know what a carburetor even is. Never mind how to tune one. So, anyways, when I went out to look at it, the price was right. Of course I had to have it. You know, I remember the first time I saw my number one, the original OG, the OOG, so to speak. I saw it driving around on the island. I'm like, God damn, that's a cool looking car. I love the nose on him. It looks like a Charger. And then this little wing back here it's a lot of wagons have some version of this. In this era, most of the time it was built into the bodywork like this from the top. Sometimes in the older ones you'll see like they've got little fins here on the side, and the purpose for that, downforce at triple digit speeds, no, I wish. The purpose of that is the wind blows through here and it keeps the dust from settling in the back window. If you take a long drive on a dirty road, you'll see it actually does work a little bit. And I think it might keep some of the exhaust smell out. The thing about these cars is any hole in the back of a station wagon and of this era, and you can see like all this stuff here, the seals are kind of old and funky, and you know, this seal down here, and aside from aesthetics and waterproof, any hole you have in the back of one of these wagons will let exhaust in, and have an exhaust come out the right out the back tip, right out underneath the bumpers, like where you would on a muscle car, is the worst thing you can do with the station wagon. This one you can see it's factory style, kind of coming out the sides. It's actually got dual exhaust. I'm not seeing the other one. It's just down there, but points out the back, and that minimizes the exhaust, but it's still bad. These are not perfect cars. The design is not perfect, and they don't last as long as you might like. The original Josephine was pretty rotten. You know, it didn't have a whole lot of floors in it. Nonetheless, it was pretty much my only car at the time. I used to drive it to work. I was a plumber, so I'd show up in people's houses with it. And, you know, from a distance, it still looked pretty elegant. It was amber Sherwood green. And they all came with this faux wood on the side of them. The standard engine in 1972 Chrysler is the 400 2-barrel, which now I know is an extremely desirable engine. The 400 is like a 383 with bigger holes in it, bigger pistons. It's a Chrysler B engine, which means it's a low deck, as opposed to an RV, which is the 440, 430, 426, 413, which is the higher deck, raised block. And it as delivered, just delivers shockingly low horsepower, which is made worse by the fact that all of the big three did a horrible job of quality control on everything back then, and engines were no exception. So some were a lot better than others, but still, I think the horsepower was like 180 or less. And the reason they're so desirable is that the bore, I'm getting a little complicated here. For all you car guys, sorry, non-car guys, the bore and stroke on a 383 or a 400 is much more conducive to high RPMs, and 72. You know, I stand to be corrected, so if you think I'm wrong about this, make sure to comment below. But I'm pretty sure 72 was the finest year for the 400. Among other things, they came in a frost-proof version for, I guess, for Alaska or something. The 400 is also a standard engine in a lot of pickup trucks. So those are thicker and beefier, and they can take even more abuse. So mine had the 400 in it, and it was a crappy one. It didn't run very well. It had the 2-barrel, and the 2-barrel carburetors are problematic. You know, you would think with a crappy old 2-barrel carburetor you get better gas mileage, but you would be wrong. And here it is. The engine in Goldie. This is actually the original engine. I was talking with Dr. Big Block about it today. Not a whole lot has been done to it. It's got the original, you know, it's the original block, original heads, original cam and lifters. What we did was, this car has been owned by, I was thinking about this, 5 different Wagons of Steel team people since I brought it back from Bothell. And everybody's pitched in their own little things here and there. So as it stands right now, the fastest it's gone is low 15s, driven by Matt Stoller. Maybe if you're listening to this, Matt, you remember what time it was, you can comment below. Low 15s at probably 90 something miles an hour, which is really impressive considering this car weighs 5,500 pounds stripped for battle. So here's what we've done to it that you can see here. It's got, these are the Mopar big block exhaust manifolds, and they're a nice piece. I was going to say they're famous. I don't think there's anything in here that's famous, but they're about as good as you're going to get for iron exhaust manifolds. I mean, the alternative is headers, which cost $750 or more for this car, which in the old days was shocking, but now that's pretty much what a good set of headers costs. But it's easier to run with the manifolds because then you don't have to mess around with all the stuff you have to mess around with headers. It's got Edelbrock Performer RPM intake manifold, which we at Wagons of Steel, through actual testing, have determined is the best all-around intake manifold for a big block Mopar. There are ones that are faster. They're you know, like the Victor, the Torquer 2, but this one really gets the job done. Just the Performer is like an aluminum version of the iron one that came on the car, and they're fine. But the only performance gain you're going to get from one of those is that it's a lot lighter than the iron one. This one actually works better. Gets you, it's worth a couple tenths. And the difference between this and a high performance intake manifold is less than that. Maybe, I don't know, maybe half a tenth. What else is going on here? Oh, hot tip. You can't see this, but this, if I could give one piece of advice to somebody who wants to hop up their old Chrysler or their old Chevy or their old Buick or anything else like that, if you've got an engine like this, came with the car, that isn't, you know, on death's door, doesn't have some kind of horrible rod knock or death rattle of some kind, the one thing you can do that's going to give you the most bang for your buck is to swap the timing set. The timing chain in one of these cars is almost always on its way out. And unlike a modern car with a timing belt, where if the timing belt goes to a certain point and then it breaks, and a lot of cars, they're interference engines, that's the end of that. The valves hit the pistons and you send the car off to the recycler. But and these cars, the chain stretches, the teeth get funky. You know, think of a worn out bicycle drivetrain. It's the same as that. And the more that the chain gets stretched and the teeth get ground down, of course eventually it'll fail and it'll ruin your engine, but in the meantime it starts messing with the architecture of the engine. Like these engines, especially like the 4-barrel I was telling you about earlier, they were executed poorly, and that accounts, you know, and then the smog equipment and all that stuff accounts for why they don't work as well as they could. But the actual design work, the stuff on the piece of paper from the engineer in the beginning is pretty good. So if you can make your engine do what it was intended to do, so, and by in this case I mean with a timing chain set controls how the crank of the engine talks to the valve train, basically, So it tells the valves when to open and shut, and for how long, and when. And as the timing chain gets stretched out, that becomes different. It starts to change because everything isn't exactly, you know, scienced out. The timing chain is old, and so it's stretched out, and it's not, and it's got some slop in it, and that will slow your car down. And many times you just put a brand new one in correctly, and bada bing, bada boom, instant improvement, more than any other thing I can think of on a car. A lot of this comes from my stock eliminator racing, you know, where you're only allowed to deal with what the factory gave you. But there you go, that's my 2 cents. The other thing I'm seeing here is we have a nice distributor in here, and distributors, by 72 Chrysler, and I'm not positive of this, I'm imagining all the big three had electronic ignition of some kind or another, and there's advantages and disadvantages to different types of ignition. The HEI is so good that, you know, there's a lot of Chryslers that run HEI, and which is high electrical, and I can't remember what it means, but this is the Mopar version of electronic ignition, and instead of having points and all that stuff under the cap, it's just got it's got like a reluctor. It's nothing touches itself. It's a magnetic, like nothing comes in contact with anything, so it's much more accurate. Whereas, you know, like a point system involves a lot of stuff rubbing on itself, and so it wears itself out eventually. Although, you know, gotta say it, for all you old guys out there, points do work, and a really well adjusted point setup will work just as well as an electronic setup. There, I said it. The odds of you having a really well adjusted point setup are slim, and it's harder and harder to get electronic or point style setups anymore. And there's all kinds of other stuff wrong with points I'm not going to bother explaining right now. You can look it up or ask somebody. What else we have? We got a good coil. I don't feel like pulling the air cleaner off right now. It's not user friendly. It takes a wrench that I don't have, but you can see from here we got a Holley carburetor on here, and that's mostly because it's a race car, and Holleys are a lot more I was going to say user friendly. If you know what you're looking at, a Carter or a Holley or a Quadrajet, they're all usable, they're all workable. You know, if you know what you're looking at, if you know what you're doing, you can work on any of them. But the Holley, you're more likely to ask your neighbor if he's got a set of 92 Jets, and he probably will. Everybody has stuff for Holleys at the racetrack, so it's just easier to work on that way. Guess that's all there's to say about the power plant in this. It was our courtesy race car for a long time. All of these cars, there's obviously no such thing as a 4-speed in a town and country station wagon. So these came from the factory with the time-tested 727 torque flight, shifted on the column. And that transmission is up to the task. It's good. You know, anytime you get one of these cars, it's going to be pretty old, obviously. So you may have to rebuild it. They don't last forever, but they last pretty close to forever. The Achilles heel in these cars is the 8 3/4 rear end that came in them. A long time ago, we were having a Dana 60 rear end, which is the upgraded big dog drag race heavy pickup truck rear end for these cars. We were having one built by a friend, and we asked him, you know, hey, how come you never build 8 3/4 rear ends? And he said, 8 3/4 rear ends are not a performance rear end. And we thought that was funny at the time. But since then, we put Danas in all of our race-worthy cars, including town and countries. This one doesn't have it yet. I suspect it's just a matter of time before it gets one. The 8 3/4 is a drop-in style rear end, which means you can you pull the wheels out just a little bit. You take, you know, obviously you're not going to have a wheel cover on there. You pull that off, pull the wheel off, and then there's a set of 5 nuts in there that secure the axle, and you take those off and you can just pull it out a little bit and you'll feel it clunk out of the ring gear carrier assembly. And then once that's happened, you know, obviously you take the drive shaft out, then you can just unbolt the rear end and take it out and swap in another one. And you know, I've done that a lot of times in these cars because I've raced these things with 8 3/4 rear ends a lot. And I'll tell you what, just as my personal piece of advice, get a Dana 60 and put one in if you want to race one of these cars. If you want to race one, call me up. I'll answer any questions you have. But my first piece of advice is change the timing chain. My second piece of advice is, before you change out too many of those 8 3/4 rear ends, save those for the show car guys. They need them. They don't make them anymore. Put a Dana in. Get a Dana from the best place I found for Danas is older Ford pickup trucks. All came with Dana 60s in them, and they're so strong they usually you can just reuse the gears that are in them. A lot of times they come with a Sure Grip or Posi or a True Track, whatever you want to call it, so you don't even have to change that. You have to change the mounting, you know, put the perches is what they're called. That's what attaches the rear end to this leaf springs. You have to change those. The length usually isn't right, so you have to usually cut the rear end down and put car rear end housing and ends on them. And you know, if you looked at it, you could tell these are the things I'll need to do, and you can do it yourself if you're handy or have somebody else do it. But that's my hot tip: buy them out of a dead pickup truck and take the rear end out and use that. Well, let's go for a drive in this thing. You can tell it's a Dr. Big Block car because it starts with one barely turning the key. It's got electric windows. Remember those kids? Electric windows that actually work in an old car like this. It's got that 440 sound to it. You can see the headliner's all gone. Headliners in these things usually they just smell like old cigarettes and whatnot. The seat's still decent. Split bench. Lots of power options. Has this kind of, I don't know what they call it, bone interior. Our dear departed friend Kenny, he had this car last before he passed away, and this is he had drag raced it. He loved it, and this is the kind of, he put this tack in there, which is pretty cool. And look at that view there. Is that huge or what? I mean, you're looking at least 8 feet, just huge, just gigantic. They make a lot of torque. Even a big old driving iron like this, it gets up and goes. It handles okay. You know, it's as big as 2 zip codes. Power steering, of course. all that many high-performance parts. You pretty much have to fabricate your own. These big wagons get a lot of attention now. If you want to get noticed at a car show, drive in with something like this. Park next to the Corvette lineup. You know, this is a great country. There's stuff wrong with it, there's stuff right with it. One of those things that's right. Big old station wagons. Everyone should have one. Should have something else too, because they're pretty expensive, but these are badass cars. Well, keep the rubber side down. Keep the shiny side up. Keep them smiling.